So yeah, we all know the Raven's going to feature on this list, but I like other wrestlers too. Growing up, my parents didn't allow wrestling in my house because my mum was worried that I would be an impressionable youth and try this at home despite WWF's insistence that I don't. In fairness to my mother, when I did get into wrestling in the year 2000, thanks to Channel 4 airing Sunday Night Heat, I did get hurt when trying this at home. Don't try this at home, kids, you'll end up like me, who groans every time he tries to pick up his daughter. I had seen wrestling. A friend of mine had the Battle Royal at Royal Albert Hall on VHS, which I was very intrigued by, so there was clearly some deep-rooted something in my psyche that wanted to watch wrestling. So when Channel 4 began airing pro wrestling, I fell in deep. And because I'm always trying to copy what Ollie has done before, I'm going to go through this list of my favorite wrestlers in autobiographical order because really it was the only way I could think to rank them. And while this list is called my 10 favorite wrestlers of all time, it's actually more like 20. Sorry, Tempest. I'm Luke Owen, hailing from partsFUNknown, and this is my 10, but not really 10, favorite wrestlers of all time. But before we get into it, here's a word from today's sponsor.
Alright, stop me if you've heard this one before. It's a late night, Netflix hasn't got anything you fancy, you've already watched Raw, SmackDown, NXT, and even NXT Level Up, as well as everything AEW has to offer this week. Heck, you've even gone and downloaded Impact Plus because you need to binge all the King of the Mountain matches. If only there was a way to break out the confines of your region's streaming services and instead experience something new. If this sounds like you, then we've got the solution to your woes, and its name is Surfshark VPN, the sponsor for today's video. Surfshark VPN is an online tool that allows you to search the web without the constant fear of someone repo manning your personal data right from under your nose. With Surfshark VPN, you can seamlessly encrypt your online data, allowing you to safely and securely do your online banking while connected to a potentially insecure public Wi-Fi. Surfshark also keeps your browser history and location locked away from websites who might want to use your data. Not only that, but you can also share potentially sensitive files without the worry of them being compromised or stolen against your will. And of course, Surfshark VPN also allows you to connect to 3,200 servers and over 100 countries across the world that you could only dream of visiting in real life. So no more bored Sunday nights. Instead, just sit back and relax, enjoy all the Hulu Plus and HBO Max you want to safely from the comfort of your own home. If all of that sounds good to you, then take a look in the description box below to find an exclusive link just for you, or alternatively visit surfshark.deals/jamnatjam, where you can help yourself to 83% off plus 3 months for free when you use the code JAMNATJAM on checkout. That's surfshark.deals/jamnatjam and use promo code JAMNATJAM for 83% off and 3 months for free.
Number 1, 2000. The Rock, but also Chris Jericho. Really, because my only exposure to WWF was Sunday Night Heat, my favorite wrestlers from this period of time should be Al Snow, Steve Blackman, Big Boss Man, The Headbangers, S.A. Rios, or Kai and Tai. But Heat also showed recaps of what was going on Raw and SmackDown, which is what led me to fall in love with The Rock. He was my first babyface champ when he won the belt at Backlash 2000, just also the first pay-per-view I watched live, thanks Channel 4 for showing that for free, and his undeniable charisma really appealed to me. He was funny, he was entertaining, and he raised his eyebrow, which in the year 2000 was the height of sophistication. Here's a photo of me in Orlando in 2000 doing the people's eyebrow. But while The Rock was my main event guy, I was never into the main event scene. I was way more interested in what the mid-card was doing. And 2000 was a great year for the WWF mid-card. They had the most stacked mid-card and never even used half of them to their full potential. That's not to mention the amazing tag scene with the Hardys, Edge and Christian, the Dudleys, Right to Center, APA, TNA. But of all of those guys, Chris Jericho was my dude. He always had the best matches, the best promos, and the best action inside the ring. I was always way more excited for his matches than anything else. I was more into him versus Benoit than I was Steve Austin versus Triple H. Wrestling was actually quite popular in my school in the year 2000 because of how easy it was to watch, and because of that, I became friends with another kid who'd been a wrestling fan for way longer than I, and he had all of the Attitude Era pay-per-views on VHS, which is how I consumed the previous years that I'd missed. But he also had tapes of another company called ECW, which is where number 2, also from the year 2000, Raven, but also most of ECW. ECW became my favorite thing on the planet, and those VHS tapes were how I discovered a lot of wrestlers who I now list as some of my favorites ever. Guys like Taz, Sandman, Sabu, Steve Corino, Jerry Lynn, Just Incredible, the Dudley Boys, Lance Storm, Chair Swinging Freaks, Terry Funk, Stevie Richards, Blue Meanie, Mike Awesome, Masato Tanaka, and Rob Van Dam. And not just because his entrance music is a very convincing cover of Walk by Pantera, which is an awesome song. But it was Raven that really caught my attention. And like my falling in love with Rob Van Dam was partly down to Pantera, my love for Raven was how he looked and how he dressed. I wore band t-shirts, I wore 3/4 length shorts, I wore check shirts tied around my waist. I was a metal kid, and Raven dressed like all my favorite bands put together. He also wore comic book t-shirts. I read comic books. And then it came to his matches, and I loved how different he was to everyone else in ECW. His promos were different, his wrestling was different, he was just different. He was awesome. I was excited when he joined WWF later in 2000, mostly because he wrestled a lot on Sunday Night Heat, so I got to see him wrestle, but he never felt the same as he did on those grimy and dirty ECW VHS tapes. I did make sure he was the first person I played as on SmackDown Just Bring It when I got that in 2001 though. When I later got into TNA, a big part of that was because Raven was there. I followed him to Ring of Honor. He was, and always will be, my guy. Plus he's part of the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. And someone else who was part of that trio. Number 3, year 2001, Kane and the Brothers of Destruction. 2001 was a weird year to be a wrestling fan. Just 1 year earlier, it was the hottest thing on the planet that everyone at school talked about. But by the end of 01, I was basically on my own. So when I look back at that year and try to work out who my favorite guy was, it shouldn't have come as much of a surprise as it did. When I watched those old Attitude Era VHS tapes, the story I was most drawn to was Kane versus The Undertaker. It was a horror movie brought to life that was full of stupid nonsense, outlandish angles, and it was f***ing metal as f***. Plus, look how awesome Kane looks. And it only got better in 2001 because we got Best Kane! When I look back at late 2000 and 2001, a lot of my favorite moments come from this guy. I fell in love with his tag team with Taker, helped by him coming out to Limp Bizkit, who were my favorite band in 2000, and these two unstoppable monsters just made my heart sing. It was less about the matches because most of them are fucking terrible in hindsight, but they had undeniable aura. They looked cool, acted cool, and were cool. I still wish Kane had won the 2001 Rumble. When I created my character on WWF No Mercy, Fox Ryder with 2 X's because he's cool and Ryder with a Y because he's such a badass. I did it first, Zach. I created him to be the third brother of destruction. I loved them that much. But at the end of 01, that was kind of it for me as a wrestling fan. Even though my guy Jericho won the belt, I had no one to talk about it to. I officially gave up in 2002 when Hogan returned and won the belt. I can't explain why, it just made me switch off. That was until I went to university in 2004, and my housemate was a wrestling fan who had all the shows I missed on DVD. 2005 was my first year back properly into watching wrestling, but it wasn't WWE that got me back. Number 4, 2005, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels. Really, this entry should just be the whole of TNA. TNA was awesome. It had a bunch of guys I recognized and loved from my days as a wrestling fan like Road Dogg, Raven, and Jeff Hardy, but it introduced me to loads of new talent that I instantly fell in love with. Petey Williams, Abyss, Monty Brown, Lance Hoyt, Shark Boy, Alex Shelley, Chris Sabin, Amazing Red, Eric Young, America's Most Wanted, and, importantly for this list, Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, and Christopher Daniels. It was AJ first, as he was the poster boy for TNA, and like Jericho in 2000, was one of the reasons I was mostly drawn to the X Division mid-card stuff more than what was happening in the main event with Jeff Jarrett. Winnie, 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 etc. His performance in the Ultimate X match at Final Revolution 2005 blew my mind, and it was blown once again when he faced Christopher Daniels in an excellent 30-minute Iron Man match. Month after month, it became an ongoing question of why the f*** isn't AJ Styles the champion? Just build the promotion around him. That was until Samoa Joe showed up and I thought, why the f*** isn't he the champion? Build the whole promotion around him! Joe was this incredible presence and was always part of my most anticipated matches on TNA pay-per-views. His run with Kurt Angle was awesome, and he became the first wrestler I ever bought a t-shirt of. It was a horrible t-shirt design, but I liked Joe so much, I needed to have his merch. I started going to local indies in my area like FWA, where TNA talent were often booked, which is what introduced me to a crop of British indie guys like Johnny Storm, Paul Burchill, Doug Williams, and Jody Fleisch, who should also have a presence on this list. And it was through FWA I also found a lot of Ring of Honor guys, which brought me to number 5, 2006, CM Punk. Yep, CM Punk always had to be part of this list. My first exposure to Punk outside of an FWA show in York Hall on DVD was his feud with Raven in Ring of Honor that I caught up through grainy VHS tapes or DVD rips from the internet. Punk was unlike anything else in wrestling. He was a great wrestler for sure, but like Kane and Taker, his aura is what set him apart from the pack. There were a lot of guys I also liked in ROH at this point. Samoa Joe was there for starters, as was Bryan Danielson, but it was Punk that I was most drawn to. His run as Ring of Honor champion is legendary, and it also coincides with when I started reading The Dirt Sheet. Not really. You see, I was part of a forum called The Smart Marks, shout out to The Smart Marks, where someone recapped what was written in the Wrestling Observer every Friday. I'm sorry, Mr. Meltzer, Meltzer, I was a poor student, I couldn't afford to buy your work. So I was really engrossed with all the goings on between Punk, Ring of Honor, and WWE. We all knew that Punk was going to WWE, but then he still won in Ring of Honor. It was a shocking moment for sure, and one I will not be forgetting. There's another name in Ring of Honor that I really grew to love, but I've lumped him in with another bunch of guys, because really, I didn't like anything in 2004 to 2010 WWE. But that all turned around with the launch of NXT and the formation of 2010 Bryan Danielson and the Nexus. This portion of the list might make you think I'm some big anti-WWE guy or something, but that's not the case. I usually kept up with Raw, always tuned into the pay-per-views, and was always part of the active discussions on the shows on the TSM forums. But there wasn't a lot of the product I outright loved. It just felt like it was a promotion that had a few top stars and then everyone else. No one felt special. The mid-card felt like it never moved. Plus, I fucking hated the return of DX with an unrivaled passion. It felt like the wrestling world was changing with TNA, Ring of Honor, and all of these other indies in America and in the UK, but WWE was taking a step backwards. But there were guys coming in like CM Punk and Bryan Danielson that made fans think, oh, or maybe the tides are going to turn here. Maybe this company is finally going to catch up with what is happening outside of its four walls. And then they called Bryan Danielson Daniel Bryan. If you weren't watching at this time, it's kind of hard to describe how disappointed wrestling fans were to hear this. It wasn't being mad, just more of a huge groan of WWE will always be WWE, I guess. Furthermore, they constantly went out of their way to bury him on commentary and present him like a loser. They argue now that they did this to get fans behind him. That's their revisionist history bullshit, because it was clearly transparent that they were doing this because they hated the rise of online wrestling fans and by extension did not like wrestlers who were over with the internet. The first series of NXT is a lot of bad television, but it did give us a group that did make some good WWE television. Now it should be noted that I sadly didn't keep up with my housemate from university. Shout out to Kel if you are watching. But in 2010 I found my new wrestling friend, a man who would go on to be the best man at my wedding. We were so excited for the Nexus. All of a sudden, this group of losers from NXT felt like the hottest act in wrestling. Finally, WWE were presenting something other than the pre-established stars as something special. This could be a group that really would ignite a passion for WWE that has been lost by a huge sway of my wrestling friends. And then Team WWE beat them in their first match, and Wade Barrett couldn't buy a win in his feud with Randy Orton because they will always be WWE. But they do represent a perception change in WWE, which also came the following year with CM Punk's pipe bomb promo. They may not really be my favorite group, it's what they represent in my fandom and my feelings towards WWE, because what the Nexus couldn't quite do, these next lads did. 2012 to 2013, The Shield and Wyatt family. My new wrestling friend was watching this new version of NXT and would always talk about the awesomeness of the Wyatt family. When I finally saw it, I totally got it. Bray Wyatt was unlike anything else in WWE, and I instantly fell in love with Luke Harper. And then The Shield debuted at Survivor Series. My first thought was, this is WWE's chance to do the Nexus, but right this time. And they did. Shield were presented as a big deal, had awesome matches with top guys, and then had awesome indie-style trios matches on pay-per-view with the Wyatts. I remember so little else of this period of WWE. I don't remember the mid-card. I don't remember the tag scene. I barely remember the main events, but I remember these 6 men, and I will never, ever forget them. It was why I was so excited to see Moxley and Brody Lee go to AEW. I felt like those two in particular were never given the fairest run. When people were booing Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins was injured, fans were clamoring for WWE to pull the trigger on Ambrose, but they never saw what we saw. He was just another Danielson to them, a guy that fans liked and the company saw nothing in. Same for Brody. I've still yet to be given one good reason why he wasn't part of the WWE Championship match at WrestleMania to conclude the Viper and the family storyline. I miss Brody Lee a lot. Around this time, I wasn't watching Raw or SmackDown week to week. My friend and I would sometimes watch pay-per-views live, Rumbles, Mania, Money in the Bank 2011, etc. But the majority of my wrestling intake was through Wrestling Observer Radio and The Brian and Vinny Show. It's how I kept up to date with what was going on. That was until 2015, and I found my new home. 2015, the 4 horsewomen, but mostly Bayley. NXT was a real awakening of my fandom in 2014. It became a weekly appointment for me. This became the product that was giving me everything the main roster was refusing to. It all ramped up in 2015 when Triple H was basically given a blank checkbook to sign all of the best talent from the independent scene with no worries of ever having to make money. But in all of those big names that came in from around the world, the new formation of the women's evolution in WWE is what kept me watching. I don't want to take anything away from Paige, the Bellas, AJ Lee, or whoever you want to post up as the true innovators of the women's evolution in WWE. They all did their hard work, but for me, it was Sasha Banks, it was Charlotte Flair, it was Becky Lynch, and it was my girl Bayley. Anytime a combination of those four names stepped into the ring, it was pure magic, and often the stuff I was most interested in. And while I loved Banks and I loved Flair and I particularly loved Lynch, it was Bayley that I was most into. Fun fact, I once wrote an article for a website that I was writing for at the time that I never posted called I am 30 years old and I'm a fan of Bayley and that's okay. I don't know what to tell you. I was in floods of tears when she finally won the NXT Women's Championship in Brooklyn. I cried even more at Respect. I was so worried she was going to lose the title to Nia Jax in London, which I was there for live, and I was gutted when she lost to Asuka, even though I sort of wanted Asuka to win because she was awesome and I bought the new Asuka t-shirt the following day. I hated what they did to Bayley on the main roster. Her heel turn has really saved what was a disastrous waste of potential, but I'll always hold dearly on to chanting, "Hey, hey, Bayley, ooh, ah, I wanna know, will you be my girl? Hey, 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 hey." Brilliant. 2015, Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of my intake of wrestling was done through Wrestling Observer Radio and Brian and Vinny. As such, I missed out on some of the great indie wrestling like Cornet era Ring of Honor, which means I didn't see the true Kevin Steen. It wasn't my era of Ring of Honor, but I knew of him through podcasts. So when he came into NXT, I knew there was a lot of hype around him. And within one entrance, one squash match, one incredible show-ending angle, I knew exactly what I'd been missing out on and spent much of the rest of the year catching up. He became my new favorite wrestler on the planet and loved his feud with longtime friend Sami Zayn. So it was awesome to go back and rewatch Steen have such a similar friendship and rivalry with a masked luchador by the name of El Generico. Their run together, whether facing off or tagging with each other, was superb. Ladder War 4 might be one of my favorite matches of all time. And Steen, now Owens, gets to tear it up with the trainee of El Generico, Sami Zayn. They did it in NXT and continue to do so on the main roster. When Owens debuted against Cena, it was a euphoric moment as an NXT fan. This was our champ in the ring with John Cena, and then he beat the prick on pay-per-view. It was amazing. It's not been a smooth run for Owens and Zayn on the main roster. Some might say it's been a frustrating one. I'd be one of those people, but things have been much better since the summer of 2022. Gee, I wonder what might have changed there. 2015 also marks my debut on the Wrestle Talk News. In fact, this video is going out just 7 days before the 8th anniversary of my first video. But 2017 is a real shift from when talking about wrestling with friends was a recreational thing and became my full-time job. And with that, I got to watch more wrestling and catch up on things I'd missed out on over the years. It also meant that now I was in London, I could go to more indie shows. And so, on November 11th, 2017, I found my new guy. 2017, Keith Lee. Rev Pro and New Japan's Global Award 2017 from York Hall was a life-changing show for me. I got to see Tetsuya Naito wrestle, El Desperado versus Matt Riddle, Yuji Nagata versus Zach Gibson, Chris Brooks and Rocky Romero, and a whopping tag match of Will Ospreay and Hiroki Goto versus Minoru Suzuki and Zack Sabre Jr. But with all of that, there was one match I wanted to talk about. Tomohiro Ishii versus Keith Lee. If you've not seen this match, you have for sure heard me talk about it. Ollie and I wouldn't shut up about it for months on end on the old Wrestle Ramble shows, and I've brought it up several times over the years as the greatest wrestling match I've ever seen live. And I fell down a rabbit hole of watching as many Keith Lee matches as I could, which also introduced me to Donovan Dijak through the awesome match they had in PWG. It got me watching more PWG and loving a lot of the guys there, who are now basically the stars of WWE. And as awesome as it was to see Keith Lee wrestle live, and I went to several shows he was on just so I could see him wrestle live, it was even more humbling to hear him say nice things about Ollie and myself and the work that we do. He's a true gent in this wrestling world, one of the nicest guys I've ever come into contact with. 2017 was an awesome year to be a wrestling fan. While the main roster was straight trash, NXT was consistently great. The indie scene was incredible, and we were in the midst of an all-time great rivalry over in New Japan between Okada and Kenny Omega. All In might have been a year away, but the groundswell was building. Something big was on the horizon. So 2017 just didn't make me fall in love with Keith Lee. 2017, The Elite. I remember going into the old Wrestle Talk studios in January of 2016 and talking to Ollie about Wrestle Kingdom 10, particularly AJ Styles versus Nakamura, Shibata versus Ishii, and Okada versus Tanahashi. But Ollie wanted to just talk about Kenny Omega, who'd had a really good match with Kushida. Like usual, Ollie was ahead of the game, because 2016 was the rise of Omega in New Japan, leading to him losing the main event of Wrestle Kingdom 11 to Okada, the start of one of the all-time perfect wrestling rivalries. I'd seen Omega through PWG shows, but this was a turning point for me. I was already into the Bucks from those PWG shows where they constantly broke the rules of what pro wrestling looked like and what it could be. I'd always loved tag team wrestling, as I mentioned earlier, and their 2016 ladder war with the Hardys was one of the most incredible things I'd ever seen. Little did I know that when watching those matches, they'd be instrumental in 2018's All In, and how that would change the wrestling landscape forever with the launch of AEW in 2019. 2020, Hangman Adam Page. Right, so here's a reminder of how I reacted when Hangman Page shockingly showed up at an indie show I was at to challenge Pac ahead of AEW's Double or Nothing. Hangman Page was always awesome, and it was clear that AEW wanted to build themselves around him, but something in 2019 just didn't click. His match with Jericho at All Out didn't land. Something felt off. But that all changed in 2020 when he went into one of my favorite character-driven stories of all time in pro wrestling, Page versus Omega. It was a perfect story that arguably didn't end when it was at its hottest in the summer and instead went into the autumn, but even then, I can still go back and watch this over and over and over again, and I have. The tag match at Revolution, the tag match with FTR, Page being kicked out of the Elite, Page looking despondent on the entrance ramp, so many iconic moments, so many iconic matches. I tuned into Full Gear fully wanting to see my boy win the big one, and my boy did. I had many frustrations with All Elite Wrestling in 2022, but my biggest one is there was not enough focus on Hangman Adam Page. And speaking of AEW not having enough focus, 2021, Eddie Kingston. To round off this list, I want to recall a conversation Ollie Davis and I had at the end of 2021 when putting together our nominations for the Wrestle Talk Podcast End of Year Awards. We were going through our favorite matches and moments and found out that Eddie Kingston was a part of basically all of them. And it hit Ollie. Eddie Kingston was his favorite wrestler. And then it hit me. He's also my favorite wrestler at this point in time. I did have this feeling in 2020 when he arrived in AEW and his incredible feud with Jon Moxley, but it blew into a new gear in 2021 when he wrestled Danielson and Punk. Honestly, his match with CM Punk might be the best match AEW has ever put on in terms of emotion and storytelling. It's perfect. He makes me feel things. He makes me believe wrestling is real. He is a unique talent that deserves so much more than AEW ever give him. He's also a total sweetheart, appearing for over an hour on the Wrestle Talk podcast when he was only supposed to do 20 minutes. But that brings us up to date with where I am at as a wrestling fan and the journey I took to get here. And I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. And why not check out this list on 10 dream matches that were never televised? I've been Luke Owen. Jam that jam.
Particularly special dark match. Some of these matches could still happen in the future, but for now you won't find any recordings of them in the world today.